Today we're running through what gear you should always bring when you head off-road, as well as a couple of nice to haves that will make your life a little bit easier. This is actually a follow-up to a video Bianca and I both filmed a couple of months ago, running through some basic tips for sand driving. So if you haven't checked that video out, I'll link it in the description down below. So I think the best way to start this video is going to be by running through the essential items first. These are the things that I personally wouldn't go off-road without. So let's kick things off with number one. It was actually harder than you might think to work out which bit of gear to run through first, but at the end of the day, the most important thing you can bring to any off-road situation is some recovery gear. And that's so that if you get stuck, which I mean, no one plans to do, but it can still happen at a moment's notice, you've at least got a way of getting some help. Now, when I say recovery gear, your mind probably jumps to things like this, snatch straps, bridles, shackles and the like. However, the most important bit of recovery gear actually isn't in this pile at all. To be safely recovered or to recover others with your vehicle, you need rated recovery points. These are points that have been specifically designed to withstand the immense load that recovery puts on your vehicle. And honestly, to do a recovery without rated recovery points, particularly a snatch recovery, could be catastrophic. My particular bull bar actually came with rated recovery points built into the front, which are these two bright red pieces just here. And having two of them, I can actually split the load between these 2 points to be even safer, but we'll come back to that in a minute. For the rear of the vehicle, I've got a removable recovery hitch that slots into my standard tow ball receiver with a 4.7 ton bow shackle. This is probably the most common solution when it comes to rear recovery points on four-wheel drive vehicles, because it does allow you to use this one assembly for both towing and for recoveries. Obviously swapping out this piece when you're doing each of those two jobs, because you should never recover off a tow ball. If you take one thing away from this video, let it be that. But the only downside to using this one assembly for both those jobs is it does give you the option to potentially forget about this recovery point and leave it at home if you've been towing more recently. And that's one of the main reasons that my recovery point pretty much stays in here 24/7. Alrighty, so now we can move on to this gear just here. So I bring three main things away with me when I head off-road. A good quality snatch strap that hasn't been used too many times, because these can wear out and become dangerous really quickly. This one's actually brand new, so all good there. A couple of extra rated shackles just to be safe, and also a equalizer or bridle. This is a really versatile bit of gear. If you're winching, you can wrap this around a tree. You can actually use it as a winch extension as well. Or how I mainly use mine is as a way of splitting the load between two recovery points. So I'd take my snatch strap, I'd put it through this so it's kind of picking up in the middle section somewhere. Then I'd run these 2 points to two separate recovery points on the front of the vehicle to split the load. Number two is nice and simple, and that's a good, reliable compressor. It doesn't necessarily have to be the most expensive, just one you can trust to get the job done. When you're off-road, you should pretty much always be lowering your tire pressures, whether that's to give you more traction on the beach like where I am today, or just to look after the tracks, which I wish more people would do. But when our tires are deflated, we need a way to pump them back up to get home again afterwards, and that's where our compressor comes in. These come in a lot of different shapes and sizes from a lot of different brands, but honestly, so long as it gets the job done, that's all that really matters. I've even got one at home that runs off my drill batteries. This is probably the most common style though. They come in their own little storage carry bags. Mine's looking a little bit worse for wear, and they connect to your vehicle's battery using these alligator clips. Now, if you're new to four-wheel driving, all you really need to know about using these compressors is to leave your vehicle's engine running while the compressor is in use, because these use a lot of power, and the built-in gauge in the included hose won't be accurate while the compressor is running either, so make sure you turn that off to check your tires. In saying that, I've never found these gauges to be particularly accurate anyway, so I'd also recommend bringing along a separate gauge. Now, number three might not be something you automatically think of when you think of four-wheel driving gear. However, communications equipment could literally be the difference between life or death depending on where you're traveling and what problems you run into. So I think it's important that it makes a list of gear you should always bring. Now, what form of communications gear you'll need really depends on the locations you're traveling to, but here are your main options. Number one, a bit controversial, it's actually your mobile phone, because if all you're traveling is within phone reception, you're going to be able to call for help a lot faster on your mobile phone than with pretty much anything else. And if where you're going doesn't have the strongest reception, there are devices available like the Cellfire Go, or actually the new Tesla Starlink as well, that allows you to boost your phone reception and internet access and use your phone in places you normally wouldn't be able to. Number 2 is either a UHF, a VHF, or a HF radio. Now, most people are only familiar with the humble UHF radio, and that stands for ultra high frequency. But as you move through to very high frequency and also high frequency radios, the transmission range gets much more significant, and the typical use goes from just communicating with other vehicles in your convoy to more emergency use only. Sticking with the more basic ultra high frequency radio for now though, these come in a couple of different shapes and sizes. You can get versions that mount to your vehicle like I've got here, mounted in the D-Max, or you can also get handheld models as well. So these allow you to communicate over a pretty significant distance to other vehicles in your area, as well as having some channels that are dedicated for safety use. They also have a built-in scan function, and that allows you to scan for other users in your area who are actively using their radio. And that means if you do happen to get stranded with your vehicle, you can stay with your vehicle, which is the #1 rule, and scan for other people in your area that might be able to provide assistance. And the other main form of emergency communication is either a satellite phone or a personal locator beacon, and they allow you to communicate your exact GPS coordinates to a predefined set of contacts from anywhere in the world. Now, this is something I've been meaning to get for the D-Max for quite a while now, and just making this video now has refreshed it in my mind, so it's going to be the first thing I do when I get home, because it's just one of those things that you hope you never need it, but the one time you do, you'll be so glad you had it. Number 4 is something that every vehicle should have, not just four-wheel drives, which is of course a basic set of tools. I'm talking things like a tyre iron and a jack to change a spare wheel, a basic set of spanners and a socket set to change belts or tighten any bolts that corrugations have rattled loose, screwdriver sets, pliers, cutting tools, knives, electrical tape, cable ties, spare globes, the compulsory can of WD-40, and the list goes on. A set of jumper cables is essential as well. I keep most of my tools in this small little bag here, which as you can see isn't huge, so isn't inconvenient to store, but just having this basic set of tools has kept me out of trouble more times than I can count. Alrighty, you'll have to excuse my sunnies, it's quite bright outside, but now moving on to a couple of nice to have bits of gear that aren't essential to take with you when you head off-road. I didn't have any of these when I was first starting out four-wheel driving, but they certainly make life a fair bit easier. First on the list is a set of tyre deflators to let down your four-wheel drive tyres. Now this is on the nice to have list because you can let your tyres down with pretty much anything, a pen lid or a twig even, and that's what I did for my first couple of years of four-wheel driving. But a set of tyre deflators makes this process a whole lot easier. Now there's a few different styles on the market, but the version that I personally prefer comes in a pack of 4. You can set the exact PSI you want on these deflators, screw them onto your tyre, and they'll be automatically let down to that pressure. There certainly are some faster deflators on the market, but what I like about these is you can deflate all 4 tyres at once, and it's essentially a hands-free exercise. So while the tyres are being deflated, I can be walking around, checking under the bonnet, grabbing a drink out of the fridge and stuff like that. And as for what pressure you should be deflating your tyres down to, it's really going to depend on what type of terrain you're driving across, but my basic rule of thumb when it comes to basic sand driving, like the beach where I am today, is I'll always deflate down to 15 PSI as my starting point. Next up, if you do find yourself stuck, then a set of recovery tracks like these are going to make your life a whole lot easier. These are essentially a strip of nice solid ground that your vehicle can grip on to drive out of sticky situations. I've used recovery tracks like these to get a lot of four-wheel drives unstuck over the years, and they do work incredibly well, which is probably why you see them on the roof of most four-wheel drives nowadays. But one thing to keep in mind is that if you've got your four-wheel drive really bogged on the beach, like down to the chassis, these won't help unless you do a lot of digging first. The most success I've had with recovery tracks like these in the past is sort of by combining a few different recovery techniques together. So the first thing I'll do is dig away the loose sand in front of all 4 tyres. Then I'll chuck these recovery tracks under the wheels that are spinning. Very important that you check which wheels are actually spinning to put these tracks under those wheels. But then I'll also deflate the tyres a little bit further if there's room to do so. And what I find doing that achieves is it sort of deflates the tyre onto the track, giving you some more grip. And then most times you can then just slowly drive out. Well, that brings us to the end of today's list of essential and non-essential four-wheel driving products that every four-wheel drive should have. If you're a seasoned four-wheel driver, I'm sure most of that list is quite familiar to you, and it's probably already on your four-wheel drive, or at least on your list. But if you do think I left something off the list, please let me know in the comment section down below so myself and everyone else can learn from you. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video. Also, a bit of a sneak preview, there's going to be some pretty significant changes coming to the D-Max. Stay tuned for a special episode in the next week or so.